So on today's episode, we talk about private equity for e-commerce, how to structure out your business for potential buyouts in the future and to infuse more capital and more expertise to your business. It's a great episode you don't want to miss if you're a founder, so do stay tuned. Hello. It's Kunle Campbell, your host of the 2x e-commerce podcast show. Now, this interview you're about to listen to is an interview I had with Chris Shipferling, and he is he's a partner at Global Wired Advisor. And in summary, they're an investment bank for buyouts in what they call the mid-lower market. So anything from $3 million to about $60 million in revenue in both sides of the Atlantic, essentially. So he talked about buyouts in the UK and buyouts in the US. Any side of the ocean, essentially. They help e-commerce. They represent largely e-commerce businesses to selling to your exit. So some of us, there are two categories of e-commerce entrepreneurs out there. There are some e-commerce entrepreneurs who view what they're doing as their life's work and they don't want to exit. They want to continue doing this for a very long part of or a very significant time in their lives. And for others, this is a vehicle. Running an e-commerce store is a vehicle towards actually doing more of what you love, more of your passion. And so most entrepreneurs I've spoken with have a 3, 5, and even 10-year plan towards building something substantial and then selling it. And this is where people like Chris and his company actually come into play. So you should be having conversations very early on with private equity companies. Now, he talked about aggregator private equity companies and boutique private equity companies and the difference. He talked about more or less the commoditization of buyouts, in essence, of buyouts with new money, essentially, through these aggregators. These aggregators have a lot of funds coming from Silicon Valley and other places, and it's like a run-of-the-mill operation. And he gave it the difference between that and a bigger company actually looking to acquire you. Now, if exit is in your mind, if you have an exit plan of sorts, you must listen to this conversation I had with Chris. It was so insightful. He's coming from a marketing background and he has 3 other partners who are very financially literate. He actually called them financial engineers because they have been involved in mergers and acquisitions at a very significant scale and have decided to just bandy up together to do something significant in the e-commerce space, in the D2C space. So it's a very, very interesting conversation. It talks about what he wants to see in a business like high AOV, which is average order value, really good LTV, lifetime value, monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, churn rate if you're doing subscription, your cash conversion cycles, all of that. They want to see all of that, your returning customer rate. They want to see all of that to kind of understand the health of your business. And he talked about the multiples, expectations from e-commerce. It's a value-packed conversation, value-packed episode. If you're looking to exit, your e-commerce brand, or if you're even looking to build an e-commerce brand and thinking, what is the exit plan, or if you're even thinking about buying an e-commerce, store, this is a very, very, very interesting, conversation. Now, speaking of which, if you are watching this on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm getting a lot of feedback, which is very, very interesting. A lot of feedback from particularly the YouTube channel. I'm seeing comments, I'm seeing direct messages on how to improve the format on YouTube. So we're working on improving the format generally and across all episodes on this show to make it a lot more enjoyable, a much more enjoyable, audio experience, or a lot more enjoyable audio-visual experience if you're watching it on YouTube. Yeah, that's it, really. That's it with this. There are no major announcements. I'm still thinking about how I'm going to format the newsletter, if that's going to go out to yourselves. Keep joining our Facebook group. It is growing. We're set to hit 1,000 members, I would say, by the end of Q1, which is exciting given the fact that we reject more people than we accept. So yeah, it's a very, very picky type, group. I'm doing weekly live Q&As on the Facebook group. So if you're really interested, you want to hear more, join the Facebook group. Just search for 2x e-commerce on Facebook and you will find it. It's always in the show notes of every single episode. So you will find that. I will just say that this is a great conversation about private equity for e-commerce or D2C e-commerce. Enjoy this episode and I'll catch you on the other side. Peace. Hi 2Xers, welcome to the 2X e-commerce podcast show. I'm your host Kunle, and this is the podcast dedicated to rapid growth in online retail. So if you work in marketing, you're a founder and you pretty much, sell online, this show's ethos really, or objective, is to help you sell more online. So each week I interview an expert, a founder at a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business or representative from a best-in-class e-commerce SaaS company to share their golden nuggets to help you grow metrics such as conversions, average order value, repeat customers, your audience size, and ultimately sales. That is essentially the remit, and it brings me to today's guest. Now, today's guest is a very, very special one because I've been getting some one-to-one conversations with yourselves, especially last year, as to finances. How do you manage finance? And you remember, earlier on in the year, very first episode of this year was with Claire Bank, which was raising, working capital, essentially how to effectively raise working capital efficiently. And we had Andrew De Souza from Claire Bank. Now, on today's episode, this episode is actually meant to be a follow-up from that one, but things happen, with the podcast. We want to talk about, preparing your company, your e-commerce company, for an exit through private equity, through a buyout, essentially, and it's something you should be thinking about from the get-go, from now. And we really want you to plan forward, 4, 5, even 10 years ahead. What should we do right now to make it for readiness, essentially for an exit, and that's everything boils down to your numbers from a marketing standpoint, your operating, just your operational efficiencies, and also your finances, and that's why I have Chris Shipferling, who is a managing partner at Global Wired Advisors, where he advises and supports organizations of all sizes as they sell their digitally native e-commerce businesses. So Chris and his team have built multiple online and e-commerce platforms and completed hundreds of business sales ranging from 1 million to 40 million plus. So with a combined experience about 70 plus years, their team essentially an investment bank, and they specialize a lot in direct to consumer e-commerce, and that's why he's here to just share his absolute. I've had a conversation with him, his knowledge in this space. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris to the show. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Oh, fantastic. I probably haven't done you sufficient justice in the introduction. Could you please introduce yourself and Global Wired Advisors?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me on today. I appreciate it. So, yeah, to be succinct, we started a few years back. The real driving thesis for our firm was small to medium-sized business owners deserve better when it comes to an exit process, when it comes to exit planning and really exit strategy. My background has been in operating. I was a sales and marketing executive for many, many years for a small to medium-sized consumer product companies, mainly in baby and toy. So kind of coming from a world that's fairly antiquated and needed really good digital strategy. Still, I think needs good digital strategy. I think they're finally kind of moving towards that. But I pivoted my career about 6 years ago to really focus on all things really call it digital marketing, and really becoming a student of digital marketing. Understanding how to have that first handshake with the consumer, whether that be through a marketplace like Amazon. So I sat down and got to really know the fabric of Seller Central, to waxing poetic about Facebook ads. Now, all of this is changing so much, so you have to stay a student almost every month.
Indeed,
It feels
indeed.
like. So yeah, I pivoted my career, and really I started my own consulting firm to help enterprise level businesses formulate good digital strategy. My partners came from the bulge bracket investment banks. What that means is, they worked for Deutsche Bank, they worked for Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, private equity, credit hedge funds, and they had very important roles. They weren't just grabbing coffee for somebody. They were working on very complex, large transactions in the billions from day to day. So, combining both of the strong financial engineering and combining that with strong digital background and really just consumer product background, we felt like we can start an investment bank to help small to medium sized business owners. We call it the lower middle market. Really, anyone who's got revenue between just shy of 5 million, call it 3 to 5 million, moving all the way up to 50 to 75 million. That's effectively our revenue range. And so yeah, it's been a fun ride. Ecom has seen an incredible paradigm shift over really the past 12 months since the pandemic. And all of your listeners, yourself included, are well versed on all of the stats when it comes to e-commerce right now. I mean, you've got really large research firms and consulting firms like McKinsey and Forrester and Bank of America doing extensive amounts of research now on e-commerce that 3 years ago they may touch on it, but it's now become a part of what they're talking about. That's a big shift. Big shift. So that's a little bit about us.
No, it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. Because from the sounds of things, you appear to be, besides the investment banking thing, you also, which is the core, obviously, like a digital due diligence, where with your knowledge, your in-depth knowledge of marketing and their in-depth knowledge of their financial engineering, background, you're able to really hone in with due diligence, which in turn, informs all of your acquisition or investment bank operations. So you're one of four
That's right.
associates or
that's right.
partners.
We have four. We're a partner-led firm, which is much different than what a lot of folks are used to in the space. A lot of folks are used to a business brokerage, which tends to have a business model of Chris or whoever could become a quote advisor unquote. I could have sold cars 3 weeks ago, and now I'm decided to sell businesses, and that's the unfortunate reality of what this world has been used to. And we felt like we could really fill a very large void in this space when it came to bringing true financial engineering, true financial backgrounds, large bulge bracket investment banking backgrounds, and to your point, coupling it with that digital know-how and understanding your metrics. If I look under the hood of any one of your clients, you and I could wax poetic about what's happening and what's going on and where the opportunities are. That's really important. And I'll say this, another thing about our firm, which is fairly unique, we have a private equity effort. We do have, which I don't think you and I have had a chance to even talk about, but we have a private equity effort. And within that private equity effort, we actually have we started with one and we're building it out. But we actually have a brand that we started from scratch. It's actually launching in the next 2 months. And we started with a former client of ours. We sold his company. He was a huge executive in the baby product space. I mean, when I say huge, he was a CEO of a manufacturing company in China. He was president and vice president for some of the largest baby product companies that exist today. And started his own direct-to-consumer effort. We sold his business. He's now come back, and he has said, I want to do this again, but I want to do it with you guys. And so from our perspective, that's a lot of fun because, it's like that commercial hair club for men. I'm not sure if you have that over in the UK.
Not yet.
But it's the guy who he would always get on TV and say, I'm not only the president, but I'm also a client, talking about his hair gel that made his hair grow back. Right. And so you feel the same way with this private equity effort. I know I'm, not trying to dumb it down, but it's really unique, and it really gives us that kind of extension of on the ground hey, we feel your pain. When you tell us about inventory and inventory management, we actually understand what you're going through because we're feeling that same pain too. We get it. When Amazon says you're only allowed to send in 200 units of a given SKU, we feel that pain. So anyway, just wanted to notate that as well.
It's fascinating because that team is just a star. With yourselves, your team, including you, with all of your digital marketing expertise, and then him from an operational standpoint, product sourcing. Sky's the limit essentially. For whatever you guys want to do, and there's you have access to capital, which would just fuel the growth of the business. So would you guys be involved in the day-to-day running of this concern, or would you just come in on by monthly meetings to steer the ship a little bit?
Yeah, we'll have board meetings about once a month.
Okay.
Probably a little bit more as the business is beginning to take off. But
Okay.
we're really truly, Global Wired Advisors that's our 100% effort.
Okay.
And then with this is really our private equity effort, and the client who is doing this with us as also a partner. He's really the one that's going to be managing, call it the portfolio company.
Okay, makes sense. So
effort,
all you guys would be doing would be looking for people like him as you expand your portfolio, and then you
potentially,
makes sense. Who probably have been ex clients of yours, which makes even more sense.
We have.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Klaviyo is a growth marketing platform that powers over 25,000 online businesses. Klaviyo understands every single customer interaction and empowers brands to create more personalized marketing moments. Listen, analyze, and act on your customer data with Klaviyo. Visit klaviyo.com/2x.
Really good experiences with our clients. They really enjoy working with our firm, and this isn't the first time we've had a client come back and ask. This was the first time we thought this was an incredible opportunity. Yeah. So yeah, we want to keep doing it. It's a little bit different than a traditional private equity, but hey.
As in, who'd have thought, digital and, financial, engineering will come in to create, niche, investment banks and, companies like yours, Okay.
Crazy.
Buyouts advisory companies like yours. Okay. Now let's talk. What's at the back of most listeners, minds right now, I can just imagine, is how and when should I plan out my exit? Where probably a few years, I don't think that many listeners are like a decade into business. Most listeners are 5 years or less, essentially.
Yeah.
So when should they start planning, and what kind of infrastructure should they have in place to get the best multiples that they can essentially ever get from D2C?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. So, Stephen Covey is a well-known author that talks about what's the name of his book?
7 Habits.
There you go. Thank you. One of those is start with the end in mind. And when you start with the end in mind, you actually formulate a company that is going to drive very healthy metrics and is going to more than like the probability of a successful exit is going to be very high. So what do I mean by that? Let's get specific, right? One, I'm building out a product line or products that have very high gross margin. I'm doing that from day one, right? Number two, I'm building out either a product or product extensions to where I can have a single consumer purchase and come back to my website and purchase over and over and over again.
Yep.
That's call it, just looking at my general marketing metrics, my general product metrics, and going, okay, how do I build out a healthy business? So it's and that's just some small examples, but starting with the end in mind, that would be the best way to do it. Now, you've got listeners who already are on the journey, didn't start necessarily with the end in mind, saw a massive COVID bump, and now they're going, hey, Chris, when could I actually go through a marketing process to sell my business? Well, it still goes back to those healthy marketing metrics. And, I think I heard you say this earlier, but knowing not only your financial metrics, but really knowing your data, like knowing your company data and having a view of where the business is going, that's extremely helpful in planning for a successful exit. So if any of your listeners are looking at their metrics and they're going, yes, I am seeing profitability, that's obviously huge. My gross margin is very healthy.
What's a healthy gross margin that really piques your attention as a PE firm?
Yeah, direct to consumer, 70%, at least 70%.
Mm-hmm.
If you're below 70%, man, I'm going, that's going to be tough for growth unless you have lots of gross margin dollars, right? That's a whole other conversation. I mean, if you're buying something for 500 and selling it for 1,000 and you're making $500 each sale, that's a lot different than if you're selling it for 50 and only making 100 and only making 50. So gross dollars, tend to come into play for that. But for the most part in consumer products, we're talking about widgets that are under 100 or under 200. Yeah. And so, having that healthy gross margin is really the fuel for all of the other metrics I want to look at. What's my cost to acquire a consumer, right? Mm-hmm. What's my, and again, going back to, what is my repeat purchase rate? What's really driving, what type of product am I selling here to help drive a higher repeat purchase rate? But gross margin, that's always going to be number one, because when it comes to a due diligence, COGS, your cost of goods, is always the most scrutinized metric anyways. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure you've got something that's driving healthy.
So gross margins, total sales minus, cost of goods, it gives you your gross margins. So it's really minimizing your COG and maximizing how much you could, sell, how much revenue you're generating to maximize that gross. Okay.
That's cool. Right. So yeah, going back to, okay, well, when do we have a conversation? I mean, look, if your metrics, and everybody who's listening, they're well aware of healthy metrics and healthy KPIs, right? They're listening to this podcast to get more information. They've been listening to you for a while. They probably have advisement, whether it's through a digital marketing firm or, advisors within the company or CMOs who are driving, the marketing for the business. Mm-hmm. When your P&L, your profit and loss statements, are starting to show substantial EBITDA, yeah, that's when you should start thinking through, okay, what does it look like to start talking to an investment bank about, what does it look like to go to market? What does it look like to go through a marketing process to eventually exit or sell my company? At that point, we would get involved, and then, I'm speaking all theoretical. If I had a real life example, you and I could really go through. But we're gonna gather all of the documentation that we need from a financial perspective. We're gonna take a look inside of their Seller Central account or inside of their Shopify or BigCommerce or WooCommerce and all their metrics. And we're going to really start to go bit by bit on every function and start to scrutinize the functionalities of the business. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be looking for specific holes or bumps in the road where buyers we're anticipating what buyers are going to say, right? So in that anticipation, we're scrutinizing all the functions when we're really starting to dive into the business itself. And that advisement, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, 24 months before going to market, all of that advisement is going to help eventually with the multiple. When you talk about multiple, though, the good news for anybody listening, we're starting to see true multiple expansion begin when it comes to this part of the capital markets. You've got I'd say 3 years ago, this was a fairly illiquid market. This is now becoming a very liquid market. What do I mean by that? You didn't have nearly as much capital, or the term in financial markets, dry powder. You didn't have nearly as much dry powder 3 years ago as you do today for companies, private equity, private investment vehicles like a Thrasio, looking specifically for e-commerce driven businesses.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay, let's break it down to, less financially savvy listeners as to what a buyout looks like. So I'm going to give a very basic scenario here.
okay.
You have a business turning over $10 million a year. Their gross profit is $7 million, as we alluded to, and their net profit is about $2.5 million. Okay. And they've been in business for 5 years. It's been a consistent growth over maybe 20% growth consistently over. They have a repeat customer rate of standard 30%, which is decent, over a 12-month period. If the founders were to approach you, how would you calculate their valuation based on their EBITDA or their gross, the gross profit, their repeat customer rate? What is valuation? What does just the back of a napkin valuation look like?
Great question. So here's where it gets nuanced. When a business owner comes to us like that, we're going to dive in and understand the company from start to finish. So we want to know, what vertical are you in? Well, that's going to be obvious. Let's just assume it's pet, right? Well, let's just say they're in a pet, they own a pet product. They've got all the metrics you just mentioned. Well, there's a couple ways to really go after the modeling for evaluation. Because if you've got a product that's going to be a really good fit into a corporate strategic acquisition strategy, so another larger pet company is looking at this going, hey, this is really interesting. Well, we're going to be able to know that very quickly through our lens, through our eyes, right? Because we're talking to lots of corporate M&A teams. We're talking to lots of corp dev teams and corporate finance teams. And so we understand kind of the nuances of what they're looking for. Well, if that's the case, the financial modeling looks a little bit different. Because from that perspective, they're going, hey, I'm actually probably looking more at your contribution margin because I don't necessarily need, half this team that you currently have in place, right? So that's why, when you hear about corporate strategic buyouts, they tend to be a bit more frothy. They tend to be a bit more juicy when it comes to the valuation because they're modeling and they're looking at it much differently. But if you're talking about a pure private equity buyout, the valuation napkin math, now what we're starting to see is multiples in the range of a business that's, call it 50. We have actually a transaction right now that's almost identical to what you just said. And, we put this out into the market. We put it through our marketing process. And the multiples that we're getting back from private equity, we have 11 offers on the company. 10 of them are true, call it funded sponsors. One is from an aggregator, one of the new aggregators that have popped up over the past 12 months. But majority is from a true funded sponsor, a private equity firm, middle market to also enterprise. We saw multiple ranges, anywhere as low as 5 all the way up to 7+. That's where we're seeing.
It's decent. Yeah.
It's strong.
Yeah.
And it's 60%. It's actually, no, it's moved 50-50 direct through Amazon, direct through Shopify. It used to be a little bit heavier on Shopify, but through the pandemic, there was just some revenue concentration shift. So on that, you're seeing multiples of 5 to 7. So that's a real-time example. Now, that's got a really good opportunity path. We actually put that in front of 113 different corporate strategics. And unfortunately, in the vertical that this particular transaction is in, the corp dev teams and the M&A teams just are very anemic in this particular vertical, and they're very antiquated. They're very much of the mindset of, well, I think I can do that myself, which is just a terrible mindset. So yeah, that's a real life example. Now, if we would have been able to, we were having some conversations with corporate strategics because putting in front of 113, you're going to have lots of conversations. And so in the conversations we had with corporate strategics, the modeling, and this is where I can speak from a real life example, a very short-term example, the modeling was looking different there versus private equity who needs to purchase the company in effect.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Did you know that cloud-hosted e-commerce platforms like Shopify and BigCommerce do not provide automatic backups? Rewind steps in to protect Shopify and BigCommerce stores with automatic backups. Rewind is trusted by over 25,000 stores. Install Rewind and get to test it for free over 7 days. And to extend the 7-day trial to 30 days, head over to rewind.io, their website, and mention 2x eCommerce.
Either replace the current team or keep most of the infrastructure in place. There's not a whole lot of adjustments you can do there, but the trade-off sometimes is, hey, we'll end up paying more value or more multiple for the company because we know we've got to keep the current infrastructure in place. So hopefully that gives you, and again, these are folks that came to us October of 2019 and it's just now getting to market. There was a lot of work that needed to be done on the business. And so when they first came to us and engaged with us, we dove in and we gave some pretty strong consultation around several functions of the business. And it took, then the pandemic hit and the numbers started going up and all of us said, hey, let's not rush this thing to market. Let's see what happens through this new wave, of strong financial growth, and the timing was right. So the first scenario where a corporation is looking for strategic acquisition from like a digital native brand just sounds to me like a place I want to be, and it kind of reminds me of what Justin Kan, who's he's the founder of ex-founder of Twitch. He's the founder of Twitch, actually. Twitch was sold to Amazon for $1 billion. So prior to the Amazon, they were in talks with Google, and he made a statement in that video. He's like, in Silicon Valley, companies are never sold; they're bought. And if strategically a bigger company seems to want to buy a smaller company and you meet all of its target metrics, the multiples just they're not traditional. They don't go into they will pay a lot more. That's right. And that's where man, you bring up a great point too. Just this is very much related. It sounds like I'm going down a rabbit trail, but it's very much related. All of these new funds that have popped up, that are only going after Amazon businesses or only going after e-commerce to businesses. They want to make you believe you're a commodity. They really do, because they want to try and juice a smaller multiple, because they've got term sheets and they've got investment committees that are watching them purchase businesses. And it's so far from the reality of when you go through a real marketing process. And that's why they poach these people. Everybody who's listening right now, the reason you're getting so many emails from, these aggregators and or private investment vehicles is they don't want you using us. Because if you go through a marketing process, through a real investment bank and a real investment banking process, we're going to try and find the right fit. We're not just trying to sell the company. You nailed it. We're trying to get you purchased. Great example. We had a UK business. It was an all Amazon business. It was sold this past September. This business in particular was just over £1 million in EBITDA. So it was on the lower side where, frankly speaking, all the aggregators would have bid on it. All of them, every last one of them. It was just a great business, but they would have given a 2.5, 3.5 multiple, lots of earnout, et cetera. Well, we took it and said, there's something intriguing. It's very vertically focused. It doesn't have 3 different brands sitting in a seller central. It was in clothing. And we went and we sought after what could be a good fit for this company. And ultimately, a fairly decent size, about $150 million strategic that owned a company just like theirs, and was also owned by a private equity firm up north. We went to the private equity firm and said, you need to pay attention to this, and they did. Well, they're not on the websites. They're not getting email blasts from brokers. They're not in that world. And so by us going to them and saying, you should pay attention to this, you should really, here's why this is such a good fit for you. This is why this is such a great purchase for your company as a roll up. They believed it because our presentation proved it. They had good representation, so we could actually defend the thesis of why they should purchase. And that business got close to a 6 multiple when you put all of the, yeah. And so you're right. Now still typical consumer product multiples, by the way, within middle market, just in the middle market, it's 7 to 13. So we're still trying to play some catch up in this lower middle market.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you bring up such a great point. Don't believe you're a commodity. Believe you have a value.
Exactly.
And if you believe that, and you're building a business that's your mindset, that's your lens. When it comes to the exit, the Twitch founder nailed it.
Yeah.
Just nailed it. You're not selling, you're being bought. That's such a great. Gosh, I love that.
That's good. I'll share the video in the show notes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a file save for me. I'm taking that quote. I'm running with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point I wanted to raise or ask was more around. Now I forget. But yeah, I'll get to that point. So let's talk about buyouts. What kind of buyouts? What are the categories of buyouts? The buyouts. So Chip Wilson, founder of Lululemon, took Lululemon. Initially, he had some PE money. He was, in the driver's seat, of Lululemon. He was taking it, expanding it, and then it was ripe for going public. Yeah. And then when he went public, he had to change the board again, and they sort of sidelined him, or he says they sidelined him into the more creative room. So he was no longer really part of the core board. And so when he screwed up in public and he said some crazy things, they had an excuse to just eject him, to essentially, get him to retire, to resign from the board. And then he just sold his stake in it, becoming a billionaire eventually. And he was really bitter about it. From all the interviews on his book, I've read and listened to, he was really, really bitter about it. And that's probably because he just felt that, Lululemon was like his life's work. And, he couldn't really disassociate himself, his personality, from Lululemon. And so he went into, but right now he's trying to find balance. Now, how do founders, what buyout options are they for founders? And how do they, for founders who want to protect themselves strategically, get the expertise, get the liquidity required to really get to that 100 million or even 500 or even $1 billion company? How should they structure deals, one-to-one, when, they're having conversations with potential buyouts, and, what buyout options are there? A bit long-winded, the question, but I hope you get it.
I do. Yeah. I mean, look, if you have I just spoke to somebody just yesterday who, at this moment is only, 3 to 5 million in revenue and wants to go public one day in 5 years. And so, what's the path towards going public? What's the path towards driving stronger growth? And how do you're asking the question, what are the stepping stones along the way, right?
Exactly. And still retaining, for those of us who still want to retain, just the power, ownership, authority, how do you still consolidate, control as you ascend, and the company becomes more complex as a machinery? How do you still become a Jeff Bezos, 20 years on, and he's still calling the shots?
Well, you stay majority stakeholder. I mean, that's how Jeff Bezos stays in control. I mean, he is a majority stakeholder of Amazon. He owns, he owns, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but at one point, and maybe he's given it up, a majority stakeholder. And again, I'm speaking out of thin air, so I don't want to speak completely out of context, but let's go back to the founders. The founders maintaining that 51% control of the company, and making sure that, you can never be outvoted when it comes to ownership of the company and decisions being made for the business. That's key to stay in the driver's seat. And typically, you want to try and stay that way for as long as possible. But the other side of the coin is, if you're a really good leader, if you're a really good CEO, you're really good at running the company, and you've got a strong skill set. Well, even if you are still giving up those minority stakes, and eventually yourself become called a minority stakeholder because it made sense to give up, 80% of the equity in order to get a cash injection to grow the business to $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion or a valuation of $10 billion one day because it goes IPO or et cetera. Those particular steps need to just be taken with very, very, very strong advisement on what really makes sense and having a team to help model out all of the risk, right? What can happen in each one of those different scenarios and each stepping stone that I'm taking moving forward. Surrounding yourself with, when it comes to call it just picking your board, let's start with stepping stone number one, right? Your advisory board. You should always fill it with people who are just not like you at all, right? They all come from various different skill sets, and they come from various different worlds that will always drive value to your company and drive value to your business. But as you give up as you do give up equity, as you're going along the way. I mean, there's really two ways to grow. You either take equity funding or debt funding. Debt funding comes with covenants, and it comes with very strict guidelines on term sheets and et cetera. So, there's lots of risk there, but you're not giving up equity. You still effectively have control as long as you're making the payments. And if you don't, the covenants say, well, whoever lended you the debt can come in and do a hostile takeover. So there's risk there. When you're giving up equity, you just know going into it, I know what I'm eyes wide open, not eyes wide shut. I know what I'm getting into here. I'm giving up some level of control of the company. And in the case of Chip and Lululemon, again, I don't know any of the details. I have not read anything in detail about it. The little I do know, there's probably a whole lot more behind the curtain than what he's saying, because, I think you said this.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Klaviyo is a growth marketing platform that powers over 25,000 online businesses. Klaviyo understands every single customer interaction and empowers brands to create more personalized marketing moments. Listen, analyze, and act on your customer data with Klaviyo. Visit klaviyo.com/2x.
Earlier, right? There's always effectively alluding, you alluded to, there's always two sides of the story, right? So this is his side of the story, but the other side might be he was a complete nightmare as a CEO and never probably should have been in a leadership position. That could be the other side of the story. And if that's the case, I worked for Evenflow, which was a private equity owned business. It was owned by Western Presidio at the time, and they put a turnaround CEO in. And he told me a story about a very well-known ice cream company that if I said the name, everybody would know who it was. But he was telling us a story about how effectively he was hired to come in and do a hostile takeover because the ownership of the company just effectively gave up the operations. Like they just, it was a terribly run business, an incredible brand, but terribly run business. And so he, in effect, had to do a hostile takeover of the company, along with the other board members in order to hit some very large goals of the business. So, the ownership never really should have been in a leadership position. They were very creative, and they should have stayed creative. So
it makes sense. It makes sense because he talks a lot about like the metrics people on the board, and he was more of a creative person. So yeah, there was a divergence in strategy or opinion and direction essentially, and majority wins. A lot of the time. Okay, so you prior to our call, you talked about minority buyouts, management buyouts, and buy side buyouts. Could you just break down those sort of buyouts to list for listeners to sort of get their head around?
Yeah, management buyouts, and I'll be succinct on all of these because I think I can breeze through them fairly quickly. Yeah. So management buyouts is simply you and I are in a business together. You own 50, I own 50, or maybe it's a 60-40 or 70-30 split. We have an amicable conversation, and you decide, hey man, I'm kind of done. I'm burnt out. I need to move on. I still have passion for the business, but it's all amicable. And so at that point you need to hire, a professional team to help, create true valuation, create deal terms. It's all intrinsic, but create deal terms that make sense and really just kind of come to a good place almost from from a mediation perspective on, what makes sense for me to buy you out. So you just want really good advisement and someone effectively kind of in the middle to run that. So that's more or less a management buyout. It's typically founder, it's first generation. That's usually where most management buyouts happen. Obviously, buy-side engagements. Buy-side engagements are, and I think you were asking me about buy-side engagements. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Buy-side.
So buy-side engagements is different. It's just a whole different type of investment banking product where, typically a private equity firm will engage with, like I was telling you earlier, we actually had 2 phone calls in the past month of private equity firms. One said, hey, I want to build out a holdings company within a specific vertical, a direct-to-consumer holdings company. I want your help identifying really good acquisition targets. Another one, a fairly large private equity firm, if I said their name, you probably would know who they were. And they came to us and said, hey, we've got a portfolio company in furniture. We're looking for e-commerce specific and heavily concentrated acquisitions as a roll-up strategy. And so, for us, we're then hired as the investment bank to go out and target potential acquisitions. So that's a buy-side engagement. A minority buyout is when someone comes in and buys less than 50% of the company. That's a minority buyout. And you do that for several reasons, and a lot of it is what we just talked about in the beginning of this particular conversation, which is, hey, I'm looking for growth capital. I'm looking for a really good partner. I mean, a private equity firm that's focused on, let's say you have a supplements business, and this private equity firm, that's all they have is portfolio companies within the supplements industry. Well, they're going to be very well resourced to then come into your business and just drive lots of synergies and synergistic. That's a very big investment banking term. But to drive synergies, that's right.
It's coming together.
To drive the synergies and really help fuel that growth. That's where a minority buyout makes the most sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense, Chris. Just to wrap up, being very respectful of your time. Do you have any sort of closing advice to listeners as to PE, e-commerce? Is there anything we haven't sort of touched upon?
Yes, I do. I would say it's kind of our overall driving thesis for Global Wired Advisors that continues to get proven out, I'd say, day after day. As a small to medium-sized business owner, you deserve a better process. You deserve a better process that's what's out there currently. And with all of this new capital and all this new liquidity that's flowing into this space, there's a lot of noise now. You need someone who can be, we like to call ourselves the jungle scouts and the Sherpas, right? Helping you kind of navigate through all of this new noise, because the thing you're most focused on, you need to stay focused on, which is your business, your asset. You don't need to distract yourself by trying to go direct to any of these private equity firms or any of these new private investment vehicles. Let us help guide you through all of this noise and put you through a much better, stronger, optimized marketing process when it comes to your exit.
That's very, very, very well said, Chris. Before I let you go, do you have any resources, books you'd recommend founders get their head around to reading?
I'm reading a book right now. I'm actually part of a mastermind with guys who are all substantiating revenue anywhere between I think the lowest was like 1 or 2 million and the highest was like 70 million, something like that. And all types of businesses, coaching businesses, consulting, e-commerce, etc. And as a group, we're going through a book, and I'm pretty much almost finished with it, and it's become one of the most remarkable It's a book I'll read every year. It's called How to Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen.
Okay.
Absolutely phenomenal book. This guy was a Harvard Business School professor that, did just a ton of consulting work as well with lots of different companies. And so he really talks about kind of how to measure your life as an entrepreneur, really, which is, measuring your life from a business and also from a home perspective. I mean, I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, a father. And so I'm also an entrepreneur, right, myself. And I've got to find that right balance of understanding how to continue to drive my business forward and make it successful, but then also how do I measure my success at home as well? Phenomenal. It's just been such a great book. So.
Balance is so important. Going back to the synergy thing, it just has to be in sync. In one way, shape, or form, or one will break, one side will break. Just off the back of, just out of curiosity, what's the name of the mastermind you're part of? We can link to it in the show notes.
Oh gosh, it's called. Well, it's with a guy named Dale Majors. It's called he owns a coaching company called Venture Way.
Okay.
I don't know if the actual mastermind has a name.
Okay. We'll link to it. We'll link to it. Okay. Because everybody's so curious. I'll start getting emails and messages saying, "What's the name of the mastermind?" Chris was talking about. I just thought to bring it. We'll link to it in the show notes for sure.
Definitely. I'm about to join another that's a bit more focused on. It's all entrepreneurs, but a bit more focused on kind of just making sure you take care of yourself and your family. Kind of. Again, I've never. I jumped ship from the W-2 world about 6 years ago, and when I did that, I never truly understood that balance of growing that business. I always read about it, but growing the business and growing your own business and how much effort you put into it versus, hey, you're still a husband, you're still a father. My kids are 11 and 8. I mean, they're in their growth years. I don't want to wake up one day and go, who are these people?
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do. So
I agree 100%. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure, having you. For those that, just listening up to now, anyone who's listening up till now will be curious to finding out more about you, to hanging out where you hang out online, where are you most active on?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're fairly limited with our social. We have a LinkedIn, so I mean, obviously you can follow us there. We put out some good, what we call, they're more than just blog posts. We call them insights, and so about once a week, once every other week, we're fairly consistent with that. So on LinkedIn, Global Wired Advisors, it's easy to find us. Our website, we continue to renovate the website, put out more content through our website. This particular podcast will go on our website. We'll live there.
Okay, cool.
So, just go to Google and type in Global Wired Advisors. Okay. and you'll find us.
We'll link to Global Wired Advisors and in the show notes also. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, Chris. Thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.